So we're on Chav Gimel Amid Beis. We're just going to recap what was going on at this point, right? Remeir, we're trying to understand that which Remeir said, that you can passel when you have two parties in the Din Torah, one of the parties can passel the dayan, a dayan. What is it talking about? Rabbi Yochanan said it's talking about he's passeling a dayan who's not a mumcha. He's a arkoyesh besurya dayan. He's one of these local yokel dayanim, where they have people who who use logic and they use economic, the knowledge of the marketplace to basically to arbitrate or mediate a conclusion. So the Gemara says, well, so we said the Gemara asked the kasha from the seifa of the Mishnah, because the Mishnah had said that Reb Meir said you could passel an eidim as well. It's not just dayanim that Reb Meir holds you could passel, but one of the parties can also passel eidim. And on that, we asked the question. The Gemara said, which we're going to get back to, Pek Kadosh Yom Adavazeh. How could someone say such a thing? It's obviously unworkable to have an option for parties to simply say, I think that the aid on the other side is a ganef and passel eidus. And so the Gemara says, so obviously I'm sorry, I really skipped the point. The point is, if the Edom if you could passel Edom is like a mumcha. So l'chayr it's shver and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said his explanation of the Mishnah of Reb Meir was that he's saying you could passel everyone besides a mumcha. But the Gemara asks that you see Reb Meir says Edom are really equivalent to a mumcha. They're fully qualified. Anyone's fully qualified to be an Edom. Even so, he says you could passel. The Gemara says obviously that wasn't what was meant by Reb Meir over there. Edom can't mean that that one of the parties just steps up and says the other party's Edom are possible. So the Gemara goes back and forth. We're talking about where who's makabel the Edom, but it didn't work out. This branch, this attempted explanation of what the Mishnah was talking about. So we're left with the problem. How could we have really two problems? First of all, we don't have a viable explanation of the second part of the Mishnah. And additionally, if we don't have a viable explanation of the second part of the Mishnah, then basically Reb is saying that a Baldin can passel Edom, so he could also l'chayr passel a mumcha. So those are our two problems. So now we're going to suggest an alternate explanation for the Edom, for how Reb Meir holds you could passel Edom, and that will, if we have that answer, then that will also answer the stira. How could of why Reb Meir says you can passel a mumcha? You can passel a mumcha. Amar Lulaza. So this is about 10 lines down on Chav Gimel Beis. Amar Lulaza. Bahu va'achal poislan. We're talking about where it's not the Baldin coming himself to passel the aid, but he's one of two Eidim who are testifying that he's a passel. We're still left with basically the same problem. How can you trust the party to say that the aid on the other side is passel? Say Eidus on it to testify legabe that he's an Egev Eidus. Obviously, if he disqualifies the other side's aid, then he's going to win the entire. We're not talking about what he's saying Eidus about him specifically. We're talking about where he's creating a general rumor, not a rumor, a taina against it. Iridamai. What is the ira? What is the complaint? What is he lodging against this aid? If we're saying that he's saying he's a gazlan, and this aid that was coming to testify for the opposing party is a gazlan and therefore not to be trusted. You still have the same problem. He's an Egev Eidus. He's coming to win his entire. Ella iru the mishpacha. We're talking about when he's saying Eidus, a more general Eidus. He's saying that this is a family of avodim, and therefore his father is an Eved and he's an Eved, and therefore it happens to be he's not going to be a kosher Eid. He's saying it is about the mishpacha. And this is just a small outgrowth of that. And therefore, he's able to say such an edus, in spite of the fact that will have good consequences for him, that he's going to win his entire, but that's not the main thrust of his edus. He's talking about the whole family. No. Listen, people are infinitely Machiavellian, and he's making this whole huge thing just is saying the whole family is avodim just to get this aid out of the entire. Now it happens to be, this sounds very strange, right? In the end, he's passing. What does he care if he'll say whatever he has to say to pass aid? So if it doesn't work to say he's a Gaz, then he'll say he's a slave. What's the? But it happens to be we have such a thing. Mamish right now with one of my sons-in-law. I think I might have mentioned this. My son-in-law is a kohen, and his cousin is a wealthy man, and he wanted to marry a Geyeris. So he got a bezdin to paskin that the grandfather was adopted and he wasn't really a kohen, and therefore he's allowed to marry a ger. And my son-in-law and his whole family they're getting letters from Gedolei Torah to protect the family's name. They don't want to be a pagam in their mishpacha that maybe they're not gehanim. They don't want to just let this lie, even though it really doesn't relevant. So he said he's not a kohen. What does that have to do? But they're making a whole big fuss about it. So I assume the Gemara is the same idea. If you're going to malign an entire family, or people no one wants to be said they're avadim, they're not qualified for many things in Yiddishkeit, so they're going to fight against it. Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yochanan says a different teretz. On our how do we explain that a party can passel an aid? Machlekes b'shtei kitei edim. The machlekes is where there are two sets of edim, and this is what we've come across this before, where you have two parties, Reuven and Shimon. Shimon said to Reuven, "You owe me money," and Reuven says, "No, I don't." And we'll make this. We're going to get into this in more detail later. But let's say Reuven says, "I have two sets of edim to support my contention." And now Shimon says, "Well, one of your first set happens to be, I know that he's a Goslin. So I, together with one other person, are testifying that he's a Goslin." The Rameir holds that if a person says, Shimon said, I forgot who said, whatever. Let's say Shimon said, "I have two pairs of Edim," and if Shimon doesn't come through with both pairs of Edim, he's going to be kicked out of court anyway. So Reuven, when he testifies about the first pair that they're puzzled, he's not harming Shimon, because Shimon anyway has to bring the second pair. Now, if one of the pairs gets puzzled for some extraneous reason, Shimon is not going to lose. All Shimon has to do is produce the two pairs of Edim. If it turns out one of them is puzzle, is a karav or a puzzle, that doesn't affect he's fulfilled what he said he's going to do. But he can't just not show up with the other one. So when Reuven puzzles the first pair of Edim, he's not doing anything to Shimon's Edis, because Shimon anyway has to produce the other one. Rabbanan Savri, Rabbanan hold, no, just because Shimon said, "I'm bringing two pairs," does not obligate him to actually bring two pairs. He said he's going to do it, but all he has to do is bring one. Just because he said he's going to do it doesn't obligate him. So therefore, if Reuven will puzzle one pair of Edim, he might possibly knock out Shimon's whole by taking away that aid. He's ruining Shimon's position, because maybe Shimon never was going to find the second pair of Edim. But the Dimi continues. But everyone would agree that if it's not a case of tzarach lavar, if it's just one set of Edim, certainly Reuven does not have the kayach to testify against Shimon's Avis, he's in a gay Avis. Amru l'fon of Amir Ravasi. Ain't Shem elakat achas mao. What if there's only one pair of Eidim? So tomorrow, ain't Shem elakat achas v'amat avu lekat achas devei and yachol lepoislan. We said that if there's only one group of Eidim, everyone agrees that one of the parties can't pass. So the Gemara clarifies. What happens if this case happened that Ruvain passled the first set of Eidim that Shimon had brought, and then Shimon Hanami brings a second pair of Eidim, but they were found to be Kroven or Psulin as well. Now we look back and we say Ruvain's testimony against Shimon's first pair of Eidim is very relevant. Now Shimon has no Eidim left. One pair was legitimately canceled. The other one was passled by the other party. So the question is, do we go back retroactively and say, now it turns out that what Reuven had done was not allowed because Reuven was really knocking out the only pair of Eidim that was valid that Shimon had on his side. So he answered back, it's too late. Once they already said their Eidos, and then Reuven legitimately passled them, the fact that the second pair that Reuven, according to Meir, that Reuven was required to bring, turns out that they were passel, it doesn't make it that we go back and now invalidate Reuven's passling of the first Eidim. That remains a good passel, and Shimon is out of luck. Some say there was Ravashi, one said it wasn't Ravami and Ravasi. Let's say this machloikus of Tzar Levar is really the machloikus of Rabbi and Shimon Gamliel. We just said it's the machloikus Remeir and the Rabbanan. Let's say it's also the machloikus of Rabbi and Shimon Gamliel. The Tanya, Habol lidin b'shtar b'chazak. Someone, again, Reuven was the muchzik kama. Reuven had in his family a piece of karka for 100 years, but now it's in the hands of Shimon. And Shimon says, Shimon says, I bought this from Reuven, and not only did I buy it from Reuven, I've been living on it for 3 years. So if you remember the way a chazaka works, we're just going straight from Baba Basra to Sanhedrin, so hopefully it's somewhat familiar. We said the way a chazaka works is a person really is supposed to hold on to his shtar, the deed with which he bought it from the original owner. But after 3 years, he can say, listen, I've held it for 3 years. I can't hold it indefinitely. After 3 years, he has an excuse for losing the shtar. So in this case, Shimon, who says he bought it from Reuven, says, listen, first of all, I was muchzik in it for 3 years, so I don't even have to hold on to the shtar. But it happens to be, I also have the shtar. So, if the current holder says, I have both a shtar kinyan, that I bought it, as well as chazaka, I have Eidim that I was there for 3 years. Nidin b'shtar, divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says he has to produce the shtar. He said he has a shtar. He has to produce it. He can't back off and say, I'm going to depend on the chazaka, and I actually lost the shtar. Shimon Gamliel says, no, he has to, the Gemara understands that at this point, it's saying he has to bring the chazaka. Does he mean to say that he has to bring the chazaka and a shtar is not enough? Certainly a shtar, all the chazaka is a support for why he lost the shtar. But certainly a shtar is better than chazaka. A chazaka is just a replacement for a shtar. So how can he say you bring a chazaka and not a shtar? If Shimon Gamliel says he could bring even the chazaka, in spite of the fact that he said that I have a shtar and a chazaka, just the chazaka is enough. The kaimalam b'tzarach levara pligi. And we said that so the explanation comes down to really here. When the current holder of the property, the current muchzik, says, I have a shtar and chazaka, does he obligate himself to actually produce the shtar just because he said so? Or do we say, no, he's just like everyone else? So according to Rebbe, he says, Rebbe says he has to bring the shtar. Rebbe holds tzarech levar. Rav Shimon Gamliel says ain't tzarech levar. Just because he said it, just because he says he has a star, he could still use the chazak. He doesn't obligate himself. So tomorrow, loy. No, it's not necessarily the same machlekes. I'll leave it to Rav Shimon Gamliel kol yamalei pligi. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says that he's nidim chazaka and ain't tzarech.
So again, so Rav Shimon Gamliel is one who says you need both.
Rav Shimon Gamliel says nidim b'chazaka. So he's saying you're not, even though he said I need a star, he doesn't. He said holds ain't tzarech levar. You don't have to fulfill, even though when you unnecessarily obligated yourself, when you said I have an extra source of a raya, he doesn't have to produce it. If he doesn't produce it, it's fine. So we can just use the chazaka.
So when we said aim alpha chazaka, that's not true. Meaning we don't say.
He's not saying you could only use a chazaka. He's saying you can produce either a star or a chazaka. But the Tanakama says just producing chazaka is insufficient because you need
claim that you have both.
Obligated yourself. So it comes down to tzarech levar. I mean, that's the habit. It's like about no. I'll leave it to Rav Shimon Gamliel. According to Rav Shimon Gamliel, who says ein tzarech levar kul amalei pligi, everyone will agree that we're going to have. Everyone's going to agree that you're going to have to. You're not going to have to ein tzarech levar. But in Rebbe, who said over there that you're tzarech levar, maybe it could be, even though over here Reb Meir says ein tzarech levar, it came out that was with the cheshbon, right? We said over here that if he's tzarech, that Reb Meir says you can passel the one pair of Edom, because Reb Meir says ein tzarech. He says ein tzarech. Tzarech levar. So he's going to have to anyway produce the other Edom. So therefore, the parceling one of the sets is not undoing the position of the other party. So I'll leave it to Rebbe. According to Rebbe, who says over here tzarech levar, it could be. I'll leave it to Rebbe. The Remeir who says that tzarech levar will hold like Rebbe who says tzarech levar. But the Rabbanan will say ad kan lekam Rebbe hasam. That which Rebbe says over there tzarech levar ela b'chazaka the mikayach shtarakas. That's because the two things are tied together, right? Like as we explained, the chazaka is just a justification for losing your star. So the two things that he's saying, they say if I have a chazaka and I have a star, it's very sensible, and there is some connection between the two of them. So when he says that I have both of them, he taka obligates himself. So over there, Rebbe will say tzarech levar. Aval hacha dahani edem lav mikayach edem achrin kasu. Over here, when the Baal Chayv says I have two pairs of edem, the two things have nothing to do with each other. So he's not as obligated in that case. The two things that it was totally gratuitous that he said I have two pairs of edem. Afilu Rebbe moided the ein tzarech levar. Even Rebbe would be moed in the case of the ein tzarech levar. So it's not necessarily a straight up comparison between the two sides. It's not that the Rebbe Reb Meir will always be like Rebbe will always be like Reb Meir, and the Rabban will be like Reb Shimon Gamliel. Kiyasa Rav and another teretz. Okay, so we're back. So this is one explanation of the din that he could be mevatel. The Edom is talking about tzarech levar. This question. Kiyasa Rav and Amar Rabbi Yochanan reisha be'edom sulin v'dayanim ksherim. He says that he's going to give an explanation not just of the second shiloh of how can you have that a party to the dispute can passel an aid. He's also going to answer the original question that Rabbi Yochanan said that he could passel mumchen, and we wanted to understand how does the Baal Din have an ability to passel someone. He says we're talking about where he passeled the Baal Din passeled both Eidim, and he says I'm testifying that both the Eidim that the other party brought and the Dayan that was installed are psulim. They're unqualified. But only half of what he contested, what he testified to, was independently verified by another pair of Eidim. So we're talking about the Eidim psulim, that other Eidim came and verified what this Baal Din was saying, the Gabi the Eidim, But the Yanim Shem, as far the only thing that's passing them is his contention. So we say Migu de Pasli Edim Pasli Nami Daini. We say that since he was believed Lagabi the Edim, we also accept what he says to Pasal the Yanim. And Sefer the Yanim Psulam Ve'edim Shem, the Sefer is talking about the opposite case, where it was verified what he said that the Yanim Apostle, and it turns out he was right. But we don't have any verification of what he said about the Edim. The Migu de Pasli the Yanim Pasli Nami Edim. And that's what the Mishnah is saying, that he could passel, meaning through this din of a migu. It's not that he's just coming out of nowhere, but he has already he said two things, and one of the things was independently verified. So we give them manas. We accept what he said about the other half of what he said, even though it's not independently verified because of a migu. Maskav Rava Bishlam with the pasli edim pasli nami daini. It's one thing if we say that since the Edom apostle, so you could pass also to the Yanim Ikka Beidina Achrina. So it's not fatal to the cause of the other party. That I could accept. That will say he's believed. Because let him find another, he could find another best. There's no other Edom. We're talking about where there is another, he has a backup here, set of Edom. So maybe someone else will come passel that second pair of Edom, but he's coming to passel. He's not. It's equivalent to where he's passel in Dayanim, because he has another alternative. The other party has another alternative set of Edom. So he's saying where there's a second pair of Edom, where there's no second pair of Edom, he can't passel it. Hainu deravdimi. So this is a little bit strange. Ravdimi said a whole different din of Tzarech Lavar. How is this Hainu de Ravdimi? So the Farshim explain is that we're anyway coming on to the concept over here. We're forcing to say that there are two pairs of Edom. Once you're saying the two pairs of Edom, that was the main problem with Ravdimi's Svara, with Ravdimi's teretz, is that you're squeezing in. It's a forced explanation that you have to say we're talking about two pairs of Edom. So over here you have the same weakness that you're being forced to explain that it's talking about two pairs of Edom. You might as well have stuck with Rav Dimi. No, he could be nayu migu. The marsav armina migu, marsav aloy armina migu. He says it's not the same thing. That the reason why Rav Dimi said his teretz was because he couldn't accept what Ravin was saying, because he didn't hold of migu. He didn't hold of this whole concept of migu. It wasn't that was be'etzem a better teretz. If you hold of migu like Ravin holds, then this is a better teretz. Rav Dimi, who didn't hold of migu, he had to say his teretz. So now we're going to go on to a little diversion up to the Mishnah, something that I found very fascinating. Guf Amar Rish Lakish, Pek Kodesh Yamed Avazeh. Rish Lakish said about what Remeir had said, that one of the parties can pass an aid. He said such a holy mouth should say something that's so wrong. So Tani Edom. So you have to say that it's talking about where there were two Edom. Is this true? Is it true that Rish Lakish had such respect for a mayor, that he had to defer to a mayor to such an extent and say he could have just said you're wrong? Rish Lakish was so powerful in his logic that when you saw him talking and learning, it was like he was taking two mountains and grinding them up. So why did he have to defer to Rameh? Why didn't he just speak straight? He says, what kind of question is this? Rameh was even greater than Rish Lakish. Rameh, it was as if he took the biggest mountains, not Stama mountain, the Hari Harim, the biggest mountain, and ground it up. So it was certainly appropriate for Rish Lakish to show deference to Rameh. So what Hachi Kama? What his point wasn't that it's such a strange thing that he listened to it, but rather he was pointing out, look how respectful Rish Lakish is. It's not, his question wasn't that why was he respectful. He was saying it's very beautiful that he's respectful. Kihadi Yosef Rabbi Kamar. Also lahatman asat sayin. Rabbi was passing a din, this din hatmana on Shabbos. He said a gzeira on top of the din of hatmana is that one can't be, if something's cold, you can't put it away in a cooler to keep it cold. There's a gzeira from where you're matman something that's hot. Amal fanav yishmal Rabbi I see. Abba hitil hakmin esatzayim. And Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi said, my father Rabbi Yossi was mater to be makritzan. He didn't hold of this chumrah. Amlik for hayrizakim. So Rabbi backed off. I'm sorry, Rabbi backed off. He says, if Rabbi Yossi paskin, then I'm not going to paskin against him. Amra Papa, borei kam mechavin zeh. You see how respectful Rabbi was to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi came hayukaf v'yoshev pnei Rabbi. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi was quoting his father Rabbi Yossi, and therefore Rabbi deferred to Rabbi Yossi's psak. But if Rabbi Yossi was alive, Rabbi himself would have deferred to Rabbi. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Memala Makom Abayis Papa. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi was the one who took over the Nesias from his father. Have a kaf of the Yoshev from Rabbi, and if Rabbi Shmuel was kaf from Rabbi, and he had represented the same Nesias that his father Rabbi Yossi did, so Rabbi Yossi would have also deferred. But even so, Rabbi said they were both showing tremendous respect to one another, in spite of the fact that they're both qualified. So now the Gemara is going. This is the part that I find interesting. I'm going to take two sticks. One I'm going to call pleasantness, and the other one I'm going to call destructive. Pleasant is the Talmidei Chacham in Eretz Yisrael, that they when they argue with one another, that when they have a disagreement, like we just quoted the stories that we just gave, but how they each showed respect when they disagreed. Chayvlim, but Chayvlim is I think it's what they call terrorists now. Chayvlim are destructive, they're terrorists. Talmidei Chacham shebebavel. Talmidei Chacham shebechavim zeh b'halacha. They destroy one another in halacha. So now the Gemara is going to go into. Now, I thought when I saw this Gemara, I was going to say it's a mile of each of them. One fights in good learning, and the other one is pleasant. The Gemara says no, that this is wrong. Not showing respect to what another person says is not good. Even though we say that's as far as arguing. But if you don't show respect to a psak, you say his psak is invalid and I'm not going to treat it as anything. That's not part of the someone's greater, or if someone gives a psak that's valid, you have to respect it. That's the chiluk that I make. And anyway, the Gemara is going to go into what the problems were with what they did in Babel. Dr. Gemara, Vayomer Ila Shnei Bnei Hayitzar Ha'imdim, said these are the children of the oil from the Shemen Zayis, Ushnei Zeisim Aleha, and these are the two olive trees. Yitzar Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Elu Talmidei Chacham she'Beretz Yisrael. When we talk about Yitzar, meaning the oil, that's Talmidei Chacham she'Beretz Yisrael. Shenoichem zeh lezeh b'halacha k'shemen. The Shemen Zayis. They're pleasant to one another, like Shemen Zayis, which is pleasant tasting. Ushneim Zeisim Aleha, and the two olive trees on top of them, Elu Talmidei Chacham she'Bavel she'merurin zeh lezeh b'halacha, that they fight bitterly like the kazayis. Like olive wood. Olive wood is very bitter. It doesn't taste good. You never see charcoal briquettes made out of olive wood because it doesn't have a good taste. So the bubble is compared to the bitterness of olive wood. I lift up my eyes and I'm going to see two women going out, and there's wind underneath their wings. And to them there are wings like the wings of a stork. But to send an ephah ben shamayim ba'aretz, and they carry an ephah between shamayim and aretz. V'omer ala malach hadover bi anahim u'elichos. As a ephah, where are they bringing this ephah? V'yomer elu alai livnos is base la base bais ba'aretz shena. They're going to build it a house in Eretz Shena. Amar Yechon mishum Reb Shimon ben Yochai zu chanufa v'gas haruach sheyardu lebavel. These shnei nashim. These they represent Hanifa, which is flattery, and Gasas Haruach, which is pride and arrogance, and he brought them to Babel. So this is again we see at Babel the machlokes, that the bitter machlokes that happened with Lagabe Halacha and Babel came from Gas Ruach, it came from arrogance. Correcting more, but Gas Ruach leBavel nochus. Is it true that arrogance is based in Bavel? But Amar Mar Asar Kam Gas Ruach LaOlam Tisha not LaElam. Ba'achs Kolam Kulai. 9 of it went to Elam, not to Bavel. I just think it's Persia or Madai, and 1 of them went to the rest of the world. So how could you say it went to Bavel? So in LaBal nochus Ishtavu v'Ishtavu LaElam. It first was brought to Bavel, and then it moved from there to Elam. It says to build a law to it, a bias. It said there were 2 women, the gasas haruach, the flattery and the arrogance were brought by 2 women, but then only 1 bias was built in Shinnah, only 1 stayed in Shinnah. So the flattery stayed in Bavel, but the gasas haruach, the arrogance, moved to Elam. Similar gasas haruach anias. But how could you say that Gas Haruach left Bavel and went to Elam? But we know that the simon for Gas Haruach, for arrogance, is being poor. Anias leBavel nachas, and Anias is in Bavel. So tomorrow, no, my Anias Torah. When we say Anias causes arrogance, it doesn't mean being monetarily poor, financially poor. It means poor in Torah. The Chsiv, Achois lanu katana, says in Shir Hashir, I have a sister who's young, Shdai Mainla, and she's not developed. Rav Yechanan, Zu Elam shezacha lilmod v'lo zachsa lilami. This is Elam that they got Torah, but they were not able to teach it to others. It was like someone who's not able to nurse, who was not developed and unable to nurse. That's the midah of Elam, but Bavel was able to teach others. And therefore, that wasn't the anias that brings with it arrogance. Das ruach. My Bavel, Amar Rav Yochanan. Why is it called Bavel? Belula b'mikra. It's soaked with chumash. Belula b'mishnah, with mishnah. Belula b'talmud, and with learning. So the Gemara b'mechashkim hayshivah.
Tell us again, but we said that there's anias in Bavel.
We said anias not. So we were asking that anias brings gas haruach.
We said it's anias Torah.
So we said the answer is that even though there's anias of regular anias in Bavel, there's not anias in Torah. Anias on Torah is only in Elam. That's why the Gas Haruach moved there. So the explanation is Bavel was not anias for this purpose, for the purpose of Gas Haruach. So tomorrow, what I find the part that I find fascinating about it is that we're talking so negatively about being tough in learning, and we were all brought up. Those of us who are, brought up in Litvish yeshivas, that was very much looked up to. Although all the Litvaks were very vociferous. My wife's grandfather of Sheps was a Talmud of Briskerov. I remember the first time I came to meet him, I said, "Oh, Shtickle Torah," started yelling at me in Yiddish, and my wife doesn't speak Yiddish. She thought he was very angry, and he was going to insist that she break up the shidduch because he was yelling so much. That's the way we learn. So tomorrow, like those in darkness, like those who are dead. These are Talmidim of Bavel because of their machlokes. The Talmud Bavli. It's because of their machlokes. It's hard to figure out what it's saying. Even though I know for us, when we look at the Talmud Yerushalmi, it's even harder. I think it's just because of the Mischoyes, we don't have a good gears of it. The Talmud Bavli is certainly difficult enough for us. Okay, we'll stop over here. Hashem will continue tomorrow at 6:30 in Shul.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for coming early.